The poker table was slick with spilled whiskey and years of desperate gambles, but Katherine Hayes had never imagined she would become one of them. Independence, California, 1878. The saloon smelled of tobacco and broken dreams, and Katherine stood in the corner with her hands clenched so tight, her nails drew blood from her palms. Her father had just bet her freedom on a pair of queens, and the four men around the table were studying their cards like vultures circling carrion. She had known her father was a gambling man, but she had not known the depths of his depravity until tonight. 3 weeks ago her mother had died of fever, and the debts had piled up faster than snow in the high Sierras. Now Katherine was 21 years old and watching her life become a bargaining chip in a game she had no power to stop. The man across from her father was called Silas Merchant, a cattle baron with cold eyes and hands that had seen too much violence. He laid down 3 jacks with a smile that made Katherine's stomach turn. Her father's face went white as old bone. The other 2 players had already folded, leaving only one man in the game. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds over the white mountains. Katherine had seen him around Independence before, always keeping to himself, always watching. His name was Garrett Kane, and he worked as a ranch hand at the Sullivan spread 20 miles north of town. He wore a dusty brown vest over a faded blue shirt, and his hands were steady as he reached for his cards. "Call," Garrett said, his voice quiet but firm. Katherine's father threw down his queens with shaking hands. Silas Merchant grinned like a coyote. But when Garrett laid his cards on the table, the entire saloon seemed to hold its breath. A straight flush. Hearts running from 9 to king, red as arterial blood. "No," Silas said, his smile vanishing. "No, that cannot be." "It is," Garrett said simply. He did not sound triumphant. He sounded tired. Katherine's father slumped in his chair like a puppet with cut strings. The pot was considerable, nearly $800, but that was not what made Katherine's heart hammer against her ribs. The bet had included her indenture papers, signed by her father just an hour ago when his luck had turned sour. Whoever won this hand would own her for the next 5 years, to work off the debt however they saw fit. Garrett gathered the money slowly, counting it with careful precision. Then he reached for the papers. Katherine watched his face, trying to read some hint of his intentions, but his expression was unreadable as granite. He stood from the table, folded the papers once, and walked toward the fireplace at the far end of the saloon. Katherine followed him with her eyes, her breath coming short. The fire crackled and spat, casting dancing shadows across the rough wooden walls. Garrett stopped in front of the flames and pulled the indenture papers from his pocket. For a long moment he stared at them, and Katherine saw something flicker across his face. Pain, maybe, or memory. Then he threw the papers into the fire. The room erupted in shouts of disbelief, but Katherine could not hear them over the roaring in her ears. She watched the papers curl and blacken, her name disappearing into ash and smoke. Garrett turned to face her, and for the first time that night, his eyes met hers directly. "You are free," he said. Katherine's legs carried her forward before her mind caught up. She pushed through the crowd of drunken miners and ranch hands until she stood face to face with the man who had just given her back her life. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the scar along his jaw, the way his shoulders carried weight invisible to everyone else. "Why?" she asked. Her voice came out raw. "Because nobody should be owned," Garrett said. "Not for a debt they did not make, not for any reason." Behind them, Silas Merchant was cursing and demanding another game. Katherine's father sat motionless at the table, staring at his empty hands. Katherine knew she should feel something for him, pity or anger or grief, but all she felt was hollow. He had tried to sell her. That fact would not change no matter how much she might wish it otherwise. "I have nowhere to go," Katherine said quietly. "He will just do it again if I stay here." Garrett was silent for a moment, considering. Then he nodded toward the door. "I have a room at the boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen rents rooms to women traveling alone. I will pay for a week while you figure things out. I cannot take your money. You just won $800, but that does not mean you owe me anything." "I do not do it because I owe you," Garrett said. "I do it because it is right." Katherine studied his face, looking for the trick, the angle, the thing he wanted in return. She had grown up in Independence, a mining town turned cattle hub where nothing came free. But in Garrett's eyes she saw only a bone-deep weariness and something else, something that looked like understanding. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." They left the saloon together, stepping out into the cool October night. Independence sat in the Owens Valley with the Sierra Nevada rising like titans to the west, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The main street was quiet except for the tinny sound of a piano drifting from the Lucky Lady across the way. Katherine breathed in the cold air and felt something loosen in her chest. "What will you do now?" she asked as they walked toward the boarding house. "Go back to work, I suppose." The Sullivan Ranch always needs hands, especially with winter coming. "No, I mean with the money. $800 is more than most men see in 2 years. Garrett's expression darkened. "I will send it where it needs to go." Katherine wanted to ask what that meant, but something in his tone warned her away from the question. They walked in silence until they reached a narrow 2-story building with a painted sign that read Chen's Rooms in both English and Chinese characters. Garrett knocked, and a middle-aged Chinese woman opened the door, her face sharp with suspicion until she recognized Garrett. "Mr. Kane," she said, her English accented but clear. "It is late." "I apologize, Mrs. Chen. This is Miss Hayes. She needs a room for at least a week, maybe longer." "I will pay in advance." Mrs. Chen looked at Katherine with eyes that missed nothing. Then she nodded and stepped aside. "Come in, both of you." The interior was clean and simply furnished, with the smell of jasmine tea and sandalwood incense. Mrs. Chen led them upstairs to a small room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Garrett counted out $20 and handed it to Mrs. Chen, who folded the bills carefully into her apron pocket. "She gets breakfast and dinner with the house," Mrs. Chen said. "Laundry once a week, no men in the rooms after dark." "Understood," Garrett said. He turned to Katherine. "Will you be all right here?" "Yes," Katherine said. "Thank you again." He nodded and left without another word. Katherine listened to his boots descending the stairs, then the quiet conversation between him and Mrs. Chen in the hallway below. When the front door closed, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake. She had been free for less than an hour, and already the weight of it was almost unbearable. Freedom meant choices, and choices meant consequences. She had 50 cents to her name and no prospects. Her father had gambled away everything her mother had left, including the little house on the edge of town. Katherine had worked as a seamstress, but most of her customers had been miners' wives who moved on when the silver played out. Independence was changing, becoming a cattle town, and there were fewer opportunities for a woman alone. But she was not property. That had to count for something. Katherine slept badly that night, waking repeatedly from dreams of her mother's funeral and the sound of cards shuffling endlessly. When dawn broke gray and cold over the mountains, she rose and washed her face in the basin, studying her reflection in the small mirror. She had her mother's dark blonde hair and her father's hazel eyes, a combination that had earned her compliments before tonight, had taught her that beauty could be a curse as much as a blessing. Breakfast was served in the dining room downstairs, a simple meal of rice porridge with preserved vegetables and eggs. Mrs. Chen served Katherine herself, sitting across the table with a cup of tea. "Garrett Kane is a good man," Mrs. Chen said without preamble. "I do not know what happened last night, but I know he would not bring you here unless you needed help. He won me in a card game," Katherine said bluntly. "My father put up my indenture papers as collateral. Garrett won and burned the papers. He set me free." Mrs. Chen's face remained impassive, but her fingers tightened slightly around her teacup. "Your father is a fool, but Garrett Kane has seen chains before. He would not put them on another." "What do you mean?" "That is his story to tell, not mine. Eat your breakfast, Miss Hayes." Strength comes from rice and resolve. Katherine ate, though the food tasted like ash. After breakfast, she helped Mrs. Chen wash dishes, needing something to do with her hands. Mrs. Chen accepted the help without comment, and they worked together in companionable silence until a knock came at the front door. Katherine's heart jumped, irrational fear flooding through her. But when Mrs. Chen answered, it was not her father or Sela's merchant. It was Garrett Kane, looking like he had not slept either. "Miss Hayes," he said when Katherine came to the door, "I wondered if you might walk with me. I have a proposition." They walked east along the main street, past the assayer's office and the general store and the whitewashed church that served all denominations, because independence was too small for sectarian division. Garrett did not speak until they reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scrubland dotted with sagebrush and Joshua trees. "I meant what I said last night," he began. "You are free, but I have been thinking. The Sullivan Ranch needs a cook. The last one quit 3 weeks ago to get married, and the men have been suffering through my attempts ever since. The work is honest. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board, and Henry Sullivan is a fair man. If you want the job, I will speak to him on your behalf." Katherine stopped walking and turned to face him. "Why are you doing this?" "I told you, because it is right." "No, there is more to it than that. You could have walked away last night. You could have kept the papers and sold them to someone else, made even more money. Or you could have used them yourself, gotten 5 years of free labor. Instead, you burned them, and now you are trying to find me work." "Why?" Garrett looked away toward the mountains. "I had a sister once. Her name was Grace. She was 19 when our parents died of cholera, left her with debts she could not pay. A man offered to clear the debts if she would work for him. She thought it was honest work. It was not. By the time I found her, she had been in his house for 2 years. She died 3 months after I brought her home. The things he did to her, she could not live with them." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I am sorry. That was 5 years ago. I have been working ever since, sending money to pay off men like him, to free women caught in the same trap. Last night when I saw you standing in that corner, I saw Grace. I could not let it happen again, not when I had the chance to stop it." "The money from the game," Katherine said. "You are sending it to help others. Most of it. I kept enough to get through winter." Katherine reached out and took his hand without thinking. His fingers were rough with calluses, warm and solid. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for me, for all of them." Garrett looked down at their joined hands, and for the first time Katherine saw him smile. It was small and sad, but real. "Will you take the job?" "Yes," Katherine said, "if Mr. Sullivan will have me." They rode out to the Sullivan Ranch that afternoon on horses borrowed from the livery. The ranch sat in a wide valley with Owens River running through it, good grazing land with water and shelter from the worst of the wind. Henry Sullivan was a burly man in his 50s with a gray beard and shrewd blue eyes. He looked Katherine over carefully while Garrett made his pitch. You know how to cook for 30 men? Sullivan asked. I can learn, Katherine said. I kept house for my parents. I know my way around a kitchen. She is honest and hard-working, Garrett added. I will vouch for her, Sullivan grunted. Your word carries weight, Kane. All right, Miss Hayes. You have a 2-week trial. If you can keep my men fed and happy, the job is yours permanent. You will sleep in the cookhouse, separate from the bunkhouse. Any man who bothers you answers to me. Understood? Yes, sir, Katherine said, relief flooding through her. Good. You start tomorrow. Kane, show her the cookhouse and introduce her to the men. The cookhouse was a long, low building next to the main house, with a huge iron stove, work tables, and shelves stocked with supplies. Katherine walked through it slowly, taking inventory. Flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, dried fruit, coffee, sugar. More than she had seen in one place since before her mother died. There was a small room off the kitchen with a cot and a trunk, simple but clean. It is not much, Garrett said from the doorway. It is mine, Katherine said. That makes it everything. The ranch hands came in for dinner that evening, curious about the new cook. Katherine had spent the afternoon making stew and biscuits, simple but filling. The men ate with the single-minded focus of men who worked hard for their living. And when they started asking for seconds, Katherine knew she had passed the first test. Garrett ate with the others, but Katherine noticed he sat slightly apart, answering questions when asked but volunteering little. The other hands clearly respected him, but there was a distance there, a wall he kept between himself and the world. Katherine understood that. She had built her own walls over the years. After dinner, she cleaned up while the men drifted back to the bunkhouse or the barn to tend their horses. Garrett stayed behind, helping her wash dishes without being asked. You do not have to do that, Katherine said. I know, but you worked hard today. Least I can do is help. They worked side by side in comfortable silence. Katherine found herself acutely aware of his presence. The way he moved with quiet efficiency, the way the lamplight caught in his dark hair. She barely knew this man, but he had changed her life completely in the span of 24 hours. Garrett, she said softly, about your sister. You said you brought her home. Where is home for you? Was a farm in Missouri, near Independence. Different Independence than this one. My parents settled there in '46, worked the land for 20 years. When they died, I tried to keep it going, but Grace's debts ate up everything. I sold the farm, paid what I could, and headed west. Been moving ever since. Do you ever want to settle somewhere? He was quiet for a long moment, his hands still in the dishwater. I did once. Not sure I remember how anymore. Katherine wanted to say something, to offer comfort, but the words would not come. Instead, she just kept washing dishes, and Garrett kept drying them, and the silence between them felt less empty than it had before. The weeks passed quickly after that. Katherine threw herself into her work with fierce determination, rising before dawn to start breakfast and falling into bed exhausted after dinner was cleared away. The ranch hands warmed to her quickly, appreciating her cooking and her no-nonsense attitude. She did not flirt or simper, just did her job well, and that earned their respect. Garrett came around often, always finding excuses. Helping with firewood, fixing a loose board on the cookhouse steps, bringing in supplies from town. Katherine looked forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. They talked while she worked, conversations that ranged from the mundane to the profound. He told her about the ranch, about training horses, about the hard beauty of the land. She told him about her mother, about learning to sew, about the books she had read before her father sold them to pay gambling debts. A month after Katherine started work, the first snow fell in the mountains. The air turned sharp and cold, and Henry Sullivan started talking about moving the cattle to lower pastures before the passes closed. Katherine was making bread when Garrett came into the cookhouse that afternoon, his hat white with snow. "Storm coming," he said. "Big one from the look of the sky. Sullivan wants to move the cattle tomorrow. Will you be gone long? 3, maybe 4 days. Depends on the weather." He paused, then added quietly, "I wanted to make sure you would be all right." Katherine looked up from her kneading, surprised by the concern in his voice. "I will be fine. Mrs. Sullivan will be here and some of the hands are staying behind. I know. I just wanted to check." He started to leave, but Katherine called out, "Garrett, wait." When he turned back, she wiped the flour from her hands and crossed to where he stood. "Be careful out there. Come back safe." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the wall he kept so carefully maintained. "I will," he said. "I promise." He left with the cattle drive the next morning, and Katherine tried not to notice how empty the cookhouse felt without the possibility of him walking through the door. She kept busy, helping Mrs. Sullivan with mending and preserving the last of the fall vegetables. But at night she lay in her small room and listened to the wind howl down from the mountains, and she worried. The 4th day came and went with no sign of the cattle drive. Katherine tried to hide her anxiety, but Mrs. Sullivan noticed anyway. "They will be fine," the older woman said kindly. "Henry knows these mountains like his own face, and Garrett Kane is one of the best hands we have ever had. They will wait out the worst of it and come home when it is safe." But the 5th day brought a rider from town with news that made Katherine's blood run cold. A group of cattle rustlers had been spotted in the high country, armed and dangerous. There had been gunfire somewhere near the pass. Katherine could not eat that evening. She made dinner for the remaining hands but barely tasted her own food. Mrs. Sullivan sat with her after the dishes were done, offering quiet companionship, but Katherine could not sit still. She paced the cookhouse until full dark, then stepped outside into the bitter cold. The stars were brilliant overhead, hard and bright as diamonds. Katherine wrapped her shawl tighter and stared toward the mountains, willing the men to come home. She thought about Garrett's sister, about the weight he carried, about the way he had looked at her before he left. "Come back safe," she had said, like he was someone who mattered to her, like he was more than just the man who had freed her. When had that happened? When had Garrett Kane become someone she could not imagine losing? She was still outside when she heard the sound of hoofbeats and cattle lowing in the distance. Katherine's heart leaped, and she ran toward the sound, heedless of the frozen ground and the darkness. She could see them now, dark shapes moving against the snow-pale ground, riders herding cattle into the pens. She counted the riders frantically, trying to identify Garrett's lean form. There, on the sorrel gelding, riding at the back of the herd. Katherine's knees went weak with relief. She waited by the cookhouse door, shivering, until the herd was penned and the riders dismounted. Garrett saw her and broke away from the others, crossing the yard in long strides. "You are hurt," Katherine said, seeing the blood on his sleeve. "It is nothing, just a graze. Inside. Now." She did not give him a chance to argue, just pulled him into the cookhouse and sat him down at the work table. She cut away his shirt sleeve carefully, revealing a long gash along his upper arm. It was not deep, but it was still bleeding sluggishly. "The rustlers?" Katherine asked as she cleaned the wound with whiskey. Garrett hissed through his teeth. "6 of them. They tried to take the herd at the pass. We fought them off, but 2 of them got away. The sheriff will have to track them down. And you decided to get shot in the process." "I said it was just a graze. It is a bullet wound, Garrett. Do not make light of it." Her hands were shaking as she bandaged his arm, fear and relief and anger all tangled together. "You promised you would be careful." "I was careful. The other man looks worse." Katherine looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I was worried about you," she said quietly. "I know. I could see it on your face." He reached up with his good hand and touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized she was crying. "I am sorry I scared you. Do not do it again. I cannot promise that. This life, it is hard and dangerous sometimes, but I can promise that I will always do my best to come back." Katherine leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "That is not enough. It is all I have." She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the scars and the weariness and the bone-deep loneliness he tried so hard to hide. She saw the man who had freed her without asking for anything in return, who sent his money to help women he would never meet, who carried his sister's death like a stone in his chest. She saw someone worth loving, and the realization terrified her. "Garrett," she whispered. "I think I am falling in love with you." He went very still. "Katherine, you do not have to say that. I do not expect anything from you. I told you you are free. I know. That is why I can say it, because it is my choice." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You gave me my freedom, and I choose to give you my heart, if you want it." For a long moment Garrett just stared at her, something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. His face pressed into her hair and she felt him shaking. "I want it," he said roughly. "God help me, Katherine, I want it more than I have wanted anything in 5 years. But I am a ranch hand with a past full of ghosts. I have nothing to offer you except myself." "Then that will have to be enough," Katherine said. She pulled back just far enough to look up at him. "Because I do not want your money or your protection or anything else. I just want you." He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious. Katherine melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I think I have loved you since I saw you standing in that saloon, refusing to be broken." "Then why did you not say anything?" "Because I did not think I deserved you. I still do not. But if you are willing to take a chance on me, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Katherine laughed, giddy with joy and relief. "You already are, you ridiculous man. You already are." They talked until dawn, sitting at the work table with their hands clasped together, making plans and promises. Garrett wanted to save enough money to buy land of his own, to build something lasting. Katherine wanted to keep cooking, maybe open a restaurant someday in a town that was growing and prosperous. They both wanted a home, a place to put down roots and stop running from the past. "It will take time," Garrett said. "I only have about $400 saved, even with the winnings from the card game. Land is expensive, and we would need money to build a house, buy livestock." "Then we save together," Katherine said firmly. "I make $30 a month here. If we are careful, we can have enough in a year, maybe 2. You would wait that long. I would wait forever for you, Garrett Kane, but I would rather not have to." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his whole face. "Then we will work hard and save every penny. And when we have enough, I will marry you proper with a ring and a preacher and everything. I do not need a fancy wedding, I just need you." "You will have both," Garrett promised. "I swear it." The winter passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Garrett and Katherine kept their relationship quiet, not from shame but from a desire to protect something precious. They met in the cookhouse after the other hands had gone to bed, talking and planning and learning each other's rhythms. Garrett taught Katherine to ride properly, taking her out on Sunday afternoons when the weather allowed. Katherine taught Garrett to make pie crust, laughing at his frustrated attempts to get the texture right. Henry Sullivan figured it out by February, but he only smiled and told them he expected an invitation to the wedding. Mrs. Sullivan was even more delighted, taking Katherine aside to tell her that Garrett was a good man who deserved happiness. The other ranch hands noticed too, but they kept their mouths shut. Garrett had earned their respect and Katherine had earned their affection. If the two of them had found something together, well, that was nobody's business but their own. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought wildflowers and green grass and hope. Garrett and Katherine had saved nearly $600 between them, and they started looking at land in earnest. There was a piece of property 15 miles south of the Sullivan Ranch, near the Alabama hills, that had good water and shelter from the wind. It was only 80 acres, but it was enough to start. They went to look at it on a Sunday in April, riding out together in the early morning. The land was rough and rocky, but Katherine could see the potential. There was a flat stretch perfect for a house, a creek that ran year-round, and enough grass to support a small herd. She walked the property with Garrett, imagining their future written on the landscape. "What do you think?" Garrett asked. "I think it is perfect," Katherine said. "I think this is where we build our life." They made an offer that week, and the owner accepted. By the end of May, they had the deed and were planning the house. Garrett and some of the Sullivan hands helped with the construction, working on Sundays and evenings. It was slow going, but by August the cabin was finished. One room for now, with space to add on later. A stone fireplace, glass windows, a porch facing west toward the mountains. It was simple and sturdy and theirs. They married in September of 1879, almost exactly a year after the card game that had changed both their lives. The ceremony was held at the little church in Independence, with Henry and Mrs. Sullivan standing as witnesses. Katherine wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar. Garrett wore his best clothes and looked terrified and happy in equal measure. The preacher asked if Katherine took Garrett to be her lawfully wedded husband, and she said, "I do," without hesitation. When he asked Garrett the same question, Garrett's voice was steady and sure. "I do," he said, "for as long as we both shall live." They exchanged simple gold bands bought with money Garrett had saved for 6 months. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed Katherine like she was his salvation. And maybe she was. Maybe they had saved each other. The reception was held at the Sullivan Ranch, a potluck affair with music and dancing and enough food to feed half the valley. Katherine danced until her feet ached, passed from hand to hand by grinning ranch hands and townspeople who had come to wish them well. But her favorite dance was the last one, slow and sweet, with Garrett holding her close and whispering promises in her ear. They rode home to their new cabin as the sun set over the Sierras, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Garrett carried Katherine over the threshold, and they stood together in the middle of their one room, taking in the magnitude of what they had built. "We did it," Katherine said softly. "We made a home." "We did," Garrett agreed. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Thank you. For what? For choosing me, for loving me, for making me believe I could have this." Katherine turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the contact. "You gave me my freedom," she said against his lips. "I gave you my heart. Fair trade, I think." "More than fair," Garrett murmured. He swept her up and carried her to the bed they had built together, and they spent their wedding night learning each other in ways both tender and passionate. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Garrett and Katherine worked hard, building their ranch one season at a time. They bought cattle and horses, added rooms to the cabin, planted a garden that Katherine tended with fierce pride. They made friends with their neighbors and became fixtures in Independence, known for their hospitality and Katherine's excellent cooking. In the spring of 1881, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a boy with Garrett's dark hair and Katherine's hazel eyes. They named him Samuel, after Garrett's father. Garrett held his son with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the reality of this small, perfect life they had created. "He is beautiful," Garrett whispered. "He is ours," Katherine said, exhausted but radiant. "Our family." Samuel was followed by a daughter in 1883, whom they named Grace. Garrett cried again when Katherine told him the name she had chosen, understanding the gift she was giving him. Their daughter would carry his sister's name and her legacy, but she would grow up free and loved and safe. That felt like healing. They added 2 more children over the next 6 years, another boy and another girl. The cabin grew with their family, expanding to 4 bedrooms and a proper kitchen where Katherine could work her magic. Garrett built a barn and a smokehouse and a springhouse for storing food. They raised cattle and horses and children, and their life was full and rich, and exactly what they had dreamed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Katherine and Garrett sat on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. The children were in bed, finally, after much protest and negotiation. The ranch was quiet except for the sound of cattle lowing in the distance and the wind moving through the Joshua trees. "You ever think about that night?" Katherine asked. "The card game." "Sometimes," Garrett admitted. "I think about how close you came to a different life, how close I came to never knowing you. I think about how you threw those papers in the fire, how you said I was free and you meant it." She took his hand, her thumb tracing the gold band he still wore. "Best thing anyone ever did for me." "You gave me a reason to stop running," Garrett said. "You gave me a home and a family and a future I never thought I would have. I should be thanking you." "Then we are even," Katherine said with a smile. They sat together in the gathering dark, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere in the house a child cried out, probably Samuel having a nightmare. Katherine started to rise, but Garrett stopped her. "I will go," he said. "You rest." She watched him disappear into the house. This man who had freed her from bondage, and then spent 10 years proving that love could be a choice made freely every single day. She heard his voice through the window, low and soothing, comforting their son. And she thought about the girl she had been, standing in a saloon corner watching her life become a poker chip. That girl would not recognize the woman Katherine had become, strong and confident and deeply loved. But she would be proud. Garrett came back out a few minutes later, Samuel in his arms. "He wanted you," Garrett said, "but I convinced him I was an acceptable substitute." Katherine laughed and made room for both of them on the bench. Samuel curled against her, already half asleep again. Garrett's arm came around them both, solid and warm and safe. "Tell me about the house we are going to build," Samuel mumbled, his eyes drifting closed. "What house?" Katherine asked. "The big one. Papa said when I grow up we will build a big house with lots of rooms." Katherine looked at Garrett, who shrugged sheepishly. "I might have mentioned that the ranch will need a proper main house someday, when we can afford it." "And will it have a library?" Samuel asked. "With lots of books, all the books you can read," Garrett promised. "And a piano for Grace, if your mother agrees." Katherine pretended to consider. "I suppose we could manage a piano, but only if you all practice." Samuel nodded seriously, then promptly fell asleep against Katherine's shoulder. They sat there for a long time, the 3 of them, while the night deepened and the moon rose over the Alabama hills. Eventually, Garrett carried Samuel back to bed, and he and Katherine retired to their own room, the one they had built with their own hands and furnished with 10 years of love. Later, lying in the darkness with Garrett's arms around her, Katherine thought about freedom. Real freedom, not just the absence of chains but the presence of choice. She had chosen this life, this man, this family, and she would choose them again tomorrow and the day after that and every day for the rest of her life. "Garrett," she whispered, I love you." She felt him smile against her hair. "I love you too. Always." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something beautiful from the ashes. Outside, the wind sang through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and promise. The ranch slept under the stars, and in the morning there would be work to do and children to feed and a life to live. But for now, there was just this peace, this love, this home they had made together. And it was more than enough. It was everything. The years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of ranch life. By the time Samuel was 15, he was working alongside Garrett every day, learning how to manage the herd and repair fences and read the weather in the mountains. Grace, at 13, had inherited her mother's skill in the kitchen and her father's stubborn determination. The younger children, Thomas and Elizabeth, were wild and bright and full of questions that kept Katherine and Garrett on their toes. The ranch prospered. Garrett had a gift for breeding horses, and the Kane Ranch became known throughout the Owens Valley for producing strong, reliable stock. Katherine's cooking skills led to her providing meals for cattle drives passing through, and the extra income allowed them to expand their holdings. By 1895, they owned 200 acres and employed 4 ranch hands year-round. But it was not the land or the money that mattered most. It was the life they had built, the love that had grown deeper and more complex with every passing year. Garrett still looked at Katherine like she was a miracle, and she still felt her heart skip when he walked into a room. They had their arguments, of course, the small conflicts that come from two strong-willed people sharing a life. But they had learned to talk through their differences, to compromise, to choose each other even when it was hard. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Garrett and Katherine walked down to the creek that ran through their property. The water was low after the hot summer, but still cold from snowmelt higher in the mountains. They sat on the bank, their feet dangling in the water, and watched the stars emerge. "Samuel asked me today about the farm in Missouri," Garrett said quietly. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That it was a good place once, but that sometimes you have to let go of the past to build a future." He paused, then added, "I told him about Grace. He is old enough to know." "How did he take it?" he cried. Then he asked if that was why we work so hard, why we treat people right, why we give to folks who need help. "And what did you say?" I said yes. I said Grace's death taught me that the world is hard and cruel sometimes, but that does not mean we have to be hard and cruel. I said we have a choice every day to be better, to do better. And I said that his mother taught me that freedom is the most precious gift you can give someone. Katherine leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "You have made her proud, you know, your sister. You have made her death mean something." "I hope so," Garrett said. "I hope she knows that she is not forgotten, that she mattered." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water and the crickets and the soft sounds of the night. Then Katherine said, "Do you ever regret it, throwing those papers in the fire? You could have had 5 years of free labor. We might have built all this faster." Garrett turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Not for one single second. Katherine, if I had kept those papers, you might have come to hate me, or worse, you might have stayed with me out of obligation instead of love. I would rather have nothing than have you as anything less than my freely chosen partner." "I would choose you 1,000 times," Katherine said fiercely. "In every life, in every circumstance, you are the best man I have ever known." "I am just a man who loves you," Garrett said. "That is all I have ever been." "That is everything," Katherine said, and kissed him. They walked back to the house hand in hand, their shadows long in the moonlight. Inside, their children slept safe and warm, dreaming of horses and adventures and all the possibilities their futures held. And in the bedroom they shared, Garrett and Katherine lay together in the darkness, talking in whispers about their plans for tomorrow and next week and next year. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but full of promise. There would be challenges ahead, droughts and illnesses and the inevitable changes that time brings. But they would face it together, the way they had faced everything since that night in the saloon when Garrett had won Katherine's freedom and given it back to her without hesitation. That was the foundation of everything they had built. Not possession, but partnership. Not obligation, but choice. Not chains, but love freely given and freely received. And in the end, that made all the difference. As the 20th century approached, bringing with it automobiles and electric lights and all manner of modern wonders, the Kane Ranch remained a place where simpler values held sway. Hard work, honest dealing, family, and love. Garrett and Katherine grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies marked by years of labor. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by shared experience and deepened by time. Their children grew up and started families of their own. Samuel married a schoolteacher from Bishop and brought her home to the ranch, where they built a house on the far corner of the property. Grace married a veterinarian and moved to Los Angeles, though she visited often with her children. Thomas and Elizabeth both stayed in the Owens Valley, marrying local people and settling within a day's ride of the home ranch. Garrett and Katherine became grandparents, then great-grandparents. They watched their legacy multiply and spread, a family tree rooted in love and freedom. And on quiet evenings when the ranch was full of children's laughter and the smell of Katherine's cooking drifted from the kitchen, they would look at each other and remember. They remembered a saloon in Independence, a card game, a moment when everything could have gone so differently. They remembered fire consuming paper, a quiet voice saying you are free, and a choice made in the face of fear. They remembered the first time they admitted they loved each other, the first night in their cabin, the first child crying in the darkness. They remembered it all, and they were grateful. Garrett Kane died peacefully in his sleep in 1918, at the age of 68. Katherine held his hand as he slipped away, whispering promises that she would be fine, that their children would take care of her, that they would be together again someday. He smiled at her one last time, squeezed her hand, and was gone. Katherine lived another 7 years, surrounded by family and love. She spent her days helping with the grandchildren, tending her garden, and writing down the stories of her life for future generations. She wanted them to know where they came from, the love that had founded their family, the courage it took to build something good from nothing. She wrote about the card game, about Garrett throwing the papers into the fire, about falling in love with a man who understood that freedom was a gift you gave without expectation of return. She wrote about building the ranch, raising children, weathering storms both literal and metaphorical. And she wrote about the choice she made every single day of her marriage, to love Garrett Kane with everything she had. Katherine Hayes Kane died in the spring of 1925, with her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were about Garrett, about seeing him again, about the home they would make together in whatever came next. They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The whole valley came to the funeral, hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Katherine's kindness and Garrett's integrity. They told stories, sang hymns, and celebrated a life well lived and a love that had changed everything. The ranch stayed in the family for generations after that, passing from parent to child to grandchild. The cabin where Garrett and Katherine first lived became a museum of sorts, preserved exactly as it had been. And every child born into the Kane family grew up hearing the story of how it all began. They heard about a woman won in a card game, about a cowboy who threw the winning hand into the fire and said you are free. They heard about a love built on choice and respect, and the fundamental belief that no person should ever own another. And they learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is give someone the freedom to choose their own path, even if it means they might walk away from you. But Katherine had not walked away. She had chosen to stay, to love, to build, and in doing so, she and Garrett had created something that lasted long after they were gone. A family, a legacy, a testament to the power of love freely given. The story became legend in the Owens Valley, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from myth. But the core of it remained true. A woman who had been treated as property, and a man who refused to accept that anyone could be owned. A choice made in a moment, and a lifetime spent honoring that choice. And if you visit Independence, California, even today, you can still find the Kane Ranch. The land has changed hands outside the family now, but the story remains. There is a historical marker on the old cabin, telling the tale of Garrett and Katherine Kane. And on clear nights when the wind blows down from the Sierras, some folks say you can still feel the echo of the love that started it all. A love built on freedom. A love built on choice. A love that proved once and for all that the greatest gift you can give someone is the power to decide their own fate. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, they will decide to share that fate with you.